Remember when that yellow tin in your kitchen cupboard meant something? When Colman's mustard wasn't just a condiment but a fiery promise that had been kept for over 180 years. The downfall of Colman's mustard is one of the most heartbreaking betrayals in British food history. For nearly 2 centuries, Colman's was more than Norwich's biggest employer. It was the beating heart of British quality, the company that proved you could make something properly and still make a fortune doing it. However, this brilliant British success story ends with shuttered factories, broken promises, and a community left wondering if the mustard in their cupboard today bears any resemblance to the legendary recipe that made Colman's the pride of Britain. This is the story of how corporate greed destroyed Britain's yellow gold, and why that tin in your kitchen will never taste like home again. The Golden Beginning. In 1814, when Britain was still celebrating Napoleon's defeat, a determined young miller named Jeremiah Colman was about to revolutionize your Sunday dinner. Taking over a flour mill in Stoke Holy Cross, just outside Norwich, Jeremiah had bigger ambitions than just grinding wheat. He'd spotted a golden opportunity hiding in plain sight: mustard. Back then, mustard was a lottery. Ground by hand with mortar and pestle, it produced a coarse, unpredictable powder that changed from batch to batch. One spoonful might leave you wondering if you'd actually eaten mustard at all, while the next could have you reaching for a glass of milk. Jeremiah Colman changed all that. Using his milling expertise, he developed a mechanized grinding process that produced an exceptionally fine, consistent powder. But here's where his genius showed. The finer the grind, the more surface area of the mustard seed was exposed, releasing those sinus-clearing volatile oils that give proper mustard its legendary kick. Colman's wasn't just smoother than anything else on the market. It was significantly hotter, more pungent, and utterly reliable. That distinctive yellow came from carefully selected brown and white mustard seeds blended with turmeric, creating the unmistakable bright colour that would become as British as the Union Jack. By 1823, Jeremiah had brought his nephew James into the business, forming J and J Colman. Success came quickly, and in 1854 they moved to larger premises at Carrow, on the banks of the River Wensum in Norwich. But what really launched Colman's into the stratosphere was royal approval. In 1866, Queen Victoria herself granted Colman's a royal warrant, officially appointing them as manufacturers of mustard to Her Majesty. This wasn't just a fancy certificate, it was marketing gold that told every household in Britain that their mustard was good enough for the Queen's table. The effect was immediate and dramatic. That royal seal of approval transformed Colman's from a successful regional business into a national obsession. The distinctive yellow branding spread like wildfire through Norwich. Delivery vans, shop fronts, advertising boards, even the local football club adopted the colour. Norwich City became known as the Canaries, their yellow shirts a proud reflection of the city's most famous export. Walk through Norwich in the 1870s, and you couldn't escape that cheerful yellow. The entire city had become Mustard City, with the Colman family as its industrial royalty. The Colmans proved to be remarkably progressive employers. They built housing for their workers, established schools, provided medical care, and created sports facilities and social clubs. Generations of Norwich families would work at Carrow, passing down not just jobs, but genuine pride in what they produced. By the 1860s, every grocer in Britain stocked those distinctive yellow tins, and every housewife knew exactly what they represented. Consistent, fiery, proper British mustard that would make your roast beef sing and your ham sandwiches memorable. The marketing genius. By the 1860s, Colman's had discovered something that wouldn't be properly understood by business schools for another century: the power of brand identity. They weren't just selling mustard, they were selling reliability, tradition, and British excellence. The iconic bull's head logo appeared in 1855, featuring a determined-looking bull that seemed to promise this mustard meant serious business. Combined with those unmistakable yellow tins, it created one of Britain's first truly national brands. No other condiment looked like Colman's. You could spot that yellow from across any shop, and every customer knew exactly what they were getting. But the real stroke of brilliance was their most famous unofficial slogan. Colman's makes its profits from the mustard left on the plate. This captured a fundamental truth about their product. British diners were notoriously optimistic when spooning mustard onto their plates, consistently taking more than they could actually handle. All that leftover mustard represented pure profit because customers had already bought it. Throughout the Victorian era, Colman's wove themselves into the fabric of British life. Roast beef and Colman's became as inseparable as fish and chips. The Sunday roast, that sacred ritual of British family life, was incomplete without a generous dollop of yellow fire cutting through rich meat and gravy. Ham sandwiches got their character from Colman's. Cheese and pickle plates needed that mustard heat. Welsh rarebit, devils on horseback, and countless other British classics depended on Colman's distinctive punch. This wasn't just a condiment, it was an essential ingredient in British identity. As the British Empire spread across the globe, Colman's followed the flag. From India to Australia, Canada to South Africa, those yellow tins appeared on dinner tables wherever British administrators, soldiers, and settlers needed a taste of home. The sun never set on the Colman's empire, and the company revelled in their status as a quintessentially British institution with worldwide reach. By the early 20th century, Colman's had achieved something remarkable. They'd become so embedded in British culture that imagining Sunday dinner without them seemed impossible. The peak years? When the Great War erupted in 1914, Colman's became part of Britain's war machine. British soldiers in the trenches of France, the deserts of Mesopotamia, and the mountains of Gallipoli could find tins of Colman's in their rations. That familiar yellow container represented more than seasoning. It was a tangible connection to home, to Sunday dinners with family, to a world worth fighting for. After the armistice, Colman's entered what would prove to be their golden age. The 1920s and 1930s saw unprecedented expansion as a grateful nation embraced familiar comforts. Virtually every British household had that yellow tin in the cupboard, not as a luxury, but as an essential part of proper cooking. The mustard itself had become inseparable from British identity. While the French perfected their smooth Dijon and Americans developed their mild yellow paste, Britain had Colman's, hot, uncompromising, and utterly without apology. It matched the national character perfectly. No nonsense, no unnecessary refinement, just pure, sinus-clearing authenticity. The Second World War only strengthened this bond. Once again, Colman's became part of the war effort, with tins reaching British forces from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Burma. Norwich itself suffered heavy bombing, but production never stopped. Workers showed up day after day despite the danger, understanding that their mustard was more than a product. It was a symbol of British resilience. By the 1950s, Colman's had achieved something extraordinary. They weren't just market leaders, they were a British institution as fundamental as the BBC or the Royal Mail. Families who had worked at Colman's for 3 or 4 generations weren't uncommon. The factory had become a city within a city with its own social clubs, sports teams, and traditions that bound the community together. The betrayal begins. Now settle in, because what comes next will make your blood boil hotter than a spoonful of vintage Colman's powder. In 1995, after 181 years of independence, everything changed. Unilever, the massive Anglo-Dutch conglomerate, bought Colman's food business from Reckitt and Colman for £250 million. With that single transaction, nearly 2 centuries of local control and community connection were sold to distant shareholders who saw Norwich as just another pin on a global map. The promises came thick and fast during the takeover. Unilever executives assured everyone that production would remain in Norwich, that Carrow Works would continue as the home of Colman's mustard, that jobs were safe. The community, understandably nervous about their beloved company being swallowed by a faceless multinational, wanted desperately to believe. After all, Colman's was Norwich. The two were inseparable, bound together by 180 years of shared history, mutual dependence, and genuine pride. For a few years, the surface remained calm. Production continued at Carrow. The yellow tins still proudly displayed Norwich on their labels. But beneath this reassuring facade, something fundamental was shifting. Unilever was doing what multinational corporations do: analyzing, optimizing, and extracting maximum value from every asset. The romantic notion of Colman's as a Norwich institution meant absolutely nothing to shareholders in London and Rotterdam. They saw a mustard factory, one small component in a vast portfolio of brands to be managed for profit. The first warning signs appeared in the early 2000s. Long-time Colman's users began complaining that something had changed. The mustard didn't taste quite right anymore. Some said it wasn't as hot. Others noticed the texture was different. The company flatly denied any recipe changes, but the complaints kept coming. Cost-cutting measures were definitely happening. Unilever's efficiency experts combed through every aspect of production, questioning practices that had defined Colman's for generations. Did they really need to source seeds from those traditional suppliers? Could packaging be simplified? Were all those quality checks actually necessary? Colman's had never been about making mustard as cheaply as possible. It had been about making the finest mustard possible, regardless of cost. That distinction between good enough and genuinely excellent was being quietly eroded by people who had never understood what made Colman's special in the first place. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, restructuring became constant. Brands were shuffled between divisions, management changed regularly. Through it all, Colman's kept producing mustard at Carrow, but everyone could sense the inevitable approaching. The final blow. On January 4th, 2018, Unilever delivered the blow that everyone had been dreading but hoping would never come. After 23 years of promises and assurances, the company announced that Carrow Works would close by the end of 2019. Production of Colman's mustard would move to Burton-upon-Trent and Germany. After 165 years, Norwich's connection to Britain's most famous mustard would be severed forever. The announcement hit Norwich like a physical blow. 113 jobs would be lost directly, but the impact went far deeper than redundancy statistics. This was about identity, about the soul of a city that had built itself around yellow tins and fiery powder. Local MP Clive Lewis called it an absolute betrayal of the workers in the city. But beyond the political rhetoric, ordinary people felt genuine heartbreak. Families who had worked at Colman's for generations suddenly faced the end of everything they'd known. Unilever's justification was predictably corporate. They spoke of consolidating production, creating efficiencies, modernizing operations, and remaining competitive. All the usual euphemisms that translate to, "we can make it cheaper somewhere else." The promises made in 1995? Ancient history. 23 years of assurances evaporated the moment the spreadsheets showed better margins elsewhere. By December 2019, it was over. The last batch of Norwich-made Colman's mustard rolled off the production line, and with it, ended one of the longest continuous manufacturing relationships in British industrial history. The workers cleared their lockers, said their goodbyes, and walked out of Carrow Works for the final time. What remained was a vast, empty shell, buildings that had once hummed with purpose, now standing silent as monuments to broken promises. And what about the mustard itself? Colman's still exists, of course. You can still buy those yellow tins in every supermarket across Britain. The packaging still features Norwich prominently, trading shamelessly on 200 years of heritage despite the product no longer having any connection to the city. But something fundamental has changed. Long-time users insist it's not the same. Maybe it's psychological. Knowing your mustard comes from Germany rather than Norwich inevitably affects how it tastes. Or maybe there were subtle recipe changes during the relocation that Unilever won't acknowledge. Either way, the trust is broken. That promise that opening a tin of Colman's meant getting the same quality your grandfather relied on is gone forever. There's bitter irony in Colman's fate. This was a company built on British identity, on the promise that real mustard came from Norwich, that quality and tradition mattered more than cost. Yet when the moment of truth arrived, none of that heritage provided any protection. The mustard that had defined British taste for 180 years became just another product to be made wherever labour was cheapest. What we lost forever. Norwich hasn't forgotten, and the wounds haven't healed. The closure left scars that run deeper than economics. This was about identity, about what it means to be a community built around something meaningful. Resentment towards Unilever remains raw and personal. Some locals refuse to buy Colman's products anymore, seeing every purchase as supporting the company that abandoned their city. Others continue buying out of habit or nostalgia, but the joy is gone. What once represented pride now carries the bitter taste of betrayal. The yellow that once symbolized Norwich's industrial glory now serves as a painful reminder of corporate callousness. You can still see traces of that proud heritage throughout the city. Street names, pub signs, the football club's colours, but they feel like ghosts haunting a place that's lost its purpose. The skills are gone too, and this might be the greatest tragedy of all. The knowledge of how to blend mustard seeds to achieve that perfect heat, how to grind them to exactly the right consistency, how to maintain quality across thousands of tins, all lost when the last workers cleared their lockers. You can't rebuild that expertise overnight. It took generations to develop, passed down from worker to worker, refined through decades of experience and pride in craftsmanship. When Unilever moved production to Germany, they might have transferred recipes and machinery, but they couldn't transfer the accumulated wisdom of 165 years. That's what makes this tragedy so complete. It's not just that Colman's mustard is no longer made in Norwich, it's that the Norwich way of making Colman's mustard is extinct forever. The relationship between city and product, built over nearly 2 centuries, was destroyed in a boardroom decision that probably took less than an hour. The human cost extends beyond the 113 redundancies. Entire families saw their heritage disappear. Children who had expected to follow their parents into the mustard works suddenly faced a future without that certainty. A community that had defined itself through its most famous product was left wondering what it was supposed to be now. And somewhere in a kitchen cupboard, there's probably a tin of Colman's from 1995, still perfect after 3 decades, still carrying that distinctive heat that made Sunday roasts memorable. A reminder of quality we'll never see again, made by people who cared about their craft in a city that was proud of what it produced. The mustard in your cupboard today might wear the Colman's name and come in a yellow tin, but it's not the same. It can't be. Because the soul of Colman's, the connection between Norwich and the product, between workers and their craft, between tradition and excellence, died the day profit margins became more important than promises. So there you have it. From Jeremiah Colman's revolutionary flour mill in 1814 to Unilever's corporate betrayal in 2018. A story that captures everything about modern British industrial decline. Because Colman's was never just about mustard. It was about the promise that British companies could be trusted, that quality mattered more than cost, that some things were too important to sacrifice for profit. It was about a community that built its identity around making something properly, and a product that carried the pride of a city to dinner tables across the world. That world is gone now, destroyed by people who never understood what they were dismantling. The yellow tins still sit on supermarket shelves, still trading on Norwich's heritage, still promising quality they can no longer deliver. But the Norwich that made them special exists only in memory. Next time you see a tin of Colman's, remember what it used to represent. Remember the Norwich families who worked at Carrow for generations. Remember when British manufacturing meant something more than a logo on foreign-made products. Remember when quality was a promise kept, not a marketing slogan. Because that's all we have left now. Memories of when British companies stayed British, when communities mattered more than spreadsheets, and when a tin of mustard could make you proud of where you came from. If this journey through British industrial heartbreak has moved you, subscribe for more stories from the Britain we've lost. and watch the video on screen about Cadbury's similar fate, because sadly, Colman's story has become the story of modern Britain itself.